Hey guys, so in the beginning learning Kubernetes, a lot of us start out with minikube or something similar, and I did as well. And eventually though, it can be nice to switch over and spin up an actual Kubernetes cluster yourself using kubeadm. And generally the progression goes, you just do a single node cluster, then maybe you do a cluster with a control plane node and maybe like 3 worker nodes. And then you do it again, but you set it up with like a load balancer in front of that initial control plane. And then if you wanted to keep going, you would have a load balancer, maybe 3 control plane nodes, and then a few worker nodes behind that. Just whatever you want to do for your own experimentation. But at least initially, I didn't find any CentOS 9 stream videos out there, so I thought I'd go ahead and throw this one together. When I set it up initially, I found there are a lot of little things that can get a person stuck that weren't covered in the Kubernetes documentation. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to use kubeadm to set up Kubernetes. Targeting CentOS 9 stream, it's going to be a single node installation. And for anybody who cares, those are the IPs that I'm going to use. The network I'm using is just the 10.0.0, but I'm going to use a subnet for this cluster. When you have Kubernetes, right, you've got your control plane nodes, your worker nodes, and they're all going to be on the same subnet there. And then if you set up load balancer IPs, they're also going to be on that same subnet. So what I'm doing here is I'm allocating that 10.0.10 subnet for this whole cluster. And you'll see that as we progress. And then I'll go ahead and upload the files to my Git repo. Actually, they're already there. So here we are. I've checked out my Git repo. And I've got a lot of these steps just automated. So we're just going to copy that setup node step there. I'm going to go ahead and switch over to that machine and run it. Oh, here we go. I'm going to leave the screen here so that people can see what happens, but then we'll go ahead and scan the scripts later and just cover the details. I am setting this up for WireGuard, a step you might not want to do. And I'm not setting up SE Linux. You probably want to do that, but at least initially when you're just doing like a home environment for experimentation, this is a quick way to make things happen. Okay, so now we have a basic Kubernetes cluster node ready to go. We just have to join it to the cluster. This might be a good time to take a snapshot. You could use this snapshot to set up all your nodes in the future and just skip this step entirely. But for now, we're ready for our next step. So that was our setup node script. And now we have the setup clusters here. It's not a script, so we're just going to walk through. Some of these steps are pretty much manual. All right, so I found that updating the hosts file can avoid a lot of problems. So we're just going to go ahead and do that. So if we, in the future, had multiple control plane nodes or worker nodes, those would all be in here. So this isn't really all that necessary for this one, but let's just do it anyways. All right, so we're going to set up an endpoint. Let's name it what our actual endpoint is, though. So we're just calling this one demo. And now in CentOS 9, I found we have to skip a couple phases. Otherwise, the install does not work. We're going to install. It's going to skip a couple phases. We're going to sleep for 40 seconds. And then we're going to run those 2 phases that we skipped. I'll just paste them all at once. All right, so those should be familiar if you've run any of the kubeadm in it before. But if not, those are the commands you would use on other control plane nodes that you're setting up and other worker nodes. Since we're just doing a single node, we don't care about those details. But in the future, you'll use them. You'll just copy paste them. After this init step, you'll just copy paste the appropriate line into the others, and then they're done as well. Nothing to it. Although there is one more step that we're getting to here. When it comes to CentOS 9 stream, I've found there's a line you have to add to the network manager, which I believe is the next one. Yeah, configure the network manager. That one was tricky to figure out. All right, just to make sure the copy paste works, I extended my terminal off the screen. I'm just gonna avoid any line wrapping issues. So you would want to run this on every node. All right, and then that's pretty much it. The cluster's there. And so now we want to connect to the cluster so that we can run commands, because it's not showing running yet. If we see, we can run commands, but it's not ready. And it's not ready because we don't have a CNI installed. So what we're going to do is copy that kubeconfig to the machine that I'm running on. And I've set something up here. Okay, so let me go add that to my DNS so that demo resolves to the IP that we've been setting up. 1 second here, I'll do that off screen. See if we got it. That might take a second to resolve. I'll just type it in manually for now. So I've created a script which takes multiple Kubernetes configurations and merges them into one configuration. And this is how I do it with this available and enable folder directories. But before I do that, let's make the configuration a little more appealing. I'm going to change all the instances of the word Kubernetes to demo. And then I'm just going to get rid of this @demo. And that names, well, you'll see what happens here in a minute. So I'll just go ahead and merge that in with my other clusters that I have set up. Now let's change into it. We're going to use demo. And there we go. Now we can look at the nodes. Oh, I added it to the wrong DNS. 1 second here. Okay, things are working better. Just clear the screen. All right, so now we are connected to the Kubernetes cluster, and it's not ready because we need to add the CNI. Let's go ahead and look at directions for that. And for now, we're just going to install Calico. And I'll just go ahead and copy paste it. Actually, I'll skip that step. I already added the project Calico cluster, so I don't need to add it again. All right, so that is spinning up, and while that's happening, let's go ahead and make one change. We're going to get the node and look at the taint. Let's use more. So because it's a control plane node, we would have a taint for no schedule there. I'm going to remove that. By just adding a minus. Oh, got to specify the name of the node. What's happening here? The node is called demo. All right, so now pods can run on the control plane node cluster. Otherwise, if the taint was there, they would only run on the worker nodes, not the control plane. All right, so now we're ready, but we can't do much without setting up the IPs, which is the next step. So we have this metal LB application. I've already installed this repo as well, so I can skip over that step. You can see from these next few steps what it's doing is making a temp directory and then putting a couple of initial configurations out. Here's one for the IP address pool, and here's one for the L2 advertisement. This one doesn't need to be customized, but the IP address pool does. So this is an IP range I used on a different machine. So we need to make a difference there. Then we need to install and then apply those two. So making our way back to our folder. There we go. So we've got our metal LB. Or I've already customized the IPs. So let's go ahead and give that a shot. And I'm also putting a sleep 40 in there, because we want to give a few seconds for that metal LB system to install and become ready before we apply those two files. Now I found it really only takes about 20 seconds, but we'll just add a little extra just to be sure. So this is the point where if you didn't remove that taint, you're going to have problems. So what the problem will look like is you'll try to apply these two files and they won't apply. And you'll think, why not? And it's because the metal LB is not running yet, because the pods couldn't deploy. So just go back to that step, make sure that you remove the taint, and then metal LB will install just fine, and everything will be good to go. All right, so they applied both just fine. I can look at what's there. Metal LB, get all good to go. All right. And now I have some additional steps here which you do not need to do. I'm installing like an SMB driver here, which I'm not recommending you do. And I've got a local storage class here, which I've had to do at times because I didn't have an RWX PVC ability. But those are for another topic. So you can just consider yourself done at this point. I'll go ahead and review the setup node script now, just for anyone who's interested. At least the parts that are perhaps a little interesting compared to what they have out there at the Kubernetes doc website. So this is all pretty standard. So here's a step you might not want to do. You might want to remove this. This is enabling the WireGuard module. And if you have a Kubernetes cluster and you want to set up WireGuard in there and use that as a VPN solution, you certainly can. But as you might imagine, in this case, we just have one node, so it's fine. But if you have several worker nodes, they're all going to have to be ready to work with WireGuard. And WireGuard needs a module within the kernel. So we'll just say it works great. I use it, but you might not want to. This is standard with these mod probes here. This is standard from the Kubernetes document. Standard. Here I'm using sed to disable SE Linux, and I'll let that be your call as well. We probably should be setting that up, certainly, in more of a production environment. And then here this doesn't matter so much except to say that this is the latest and greatest version of Kubernetes and the tools. But if you want to install a specific version, you can do that here. And I'm also just disabling the firewall. You might not want to do that, at least not in a production environment. This is standard to disable the swap. This is also something I use to get that WireGuard working, and you might not want to do that on all your systems. That could create some vulnerabilities. And sysctl just to reload that IP forward. And let's see. Okay, this was pretty custom for CentOS 9 stream in order to configure containerd. So I did find some guides out there, but they weren't perfect. So I would say this is really beneficial if you're setting up CentOS 9 stream. This will save you some problems. I tried to just copy over what I needed into this config file, and that did not work for me. I ended up having to dump the entire default configuration using this command of containerd, and then modifying that fully fleshed out configuration and making this change around systemd. That works great. And then I also got this tip from another person. We need to modify this pause image. So that's a bonus because you watch this video. All right, then you restart the containerd. And then I found a tool needed TC, so I'm still installing that. Maybe we don't actually need that anymore. This is kind of a beginner video, I figure. The only people who want to set up a single node are people who are experimenting. So this is probably something you're going to run into. You'll have a share on your Windows system and you're looking to use that. And you feel free to use this CIFS flex volume. I think a lot of people do that initially. Eventually, you're not going to want to use that, but it'll get you started. I have it here and commented out because I stopped using it after a while. Eventually, I set up a TrueNAS server, and you might want to do that. And TrueNAS has its own CSI for accessing shares. You can use TrueNAS with iSCSI. That works pretty good, but it doesn't give you the RWX. I mean, it kind of does, but you'll see what I mean if you try to use something like Plex or Nextcloud. They won't work. They have to use a local share. But that's why I've recently set up Ceph, which you might have saw on my screen before. I believe that's going to work for me to finally let me use the RWX. And similarly, here's a iSCSI, and that's from when I was using, well, that's if you use something like Longhorn, it needs iSCSI. And I think after you use CIFS, you're probably going to move on to Longhorn. But then, yeah, eventually other things. But yeah, here's some steps for installing iSCSI in case you need to do that in the meantime. And then here is something that I use because my nodes are running on XCP-ng. And not to necessarily promote that, but it doesn't work with Cluster API. But it has worked wonderfully for all my home lab needs so far. And they have this as like a client that makes things work better with XCP-ng. So you can skip that if you're not using XCP-ng as well. And then, yeah, here's something I ran into just today. I wonder if CentOS stream made a change, or maybe Kubernetes made a change. I don't know. But I was seeing this error around failed to allocate directory, too many files open. So I ran this command and everything started working. So I'm leaving that in there as a standard configuration and until something changes. All right, so that's it. You should be good to go. Deploy something out there. Here, let's just demo that it works. Okay, deploy, create deployment, WordPress. That should work, right? All right, guys. Good luck experimenting. Bye.